"Mom, don't come anymore. My family doesn't need you." That is the sentence my son used to cut me out of his life. I want to tell this exactly as it happened, without softening it, because what broke me that night was not misunderstanding or hurt feelings. It was humiliation, public, physical, undeniable humiliation delivered by the child I raised with my own hands. My name is Lorraine Harper. I am 63 years old, a retired nurse, a black woman who spent her entire adult life believing that love, sacrifice, and endurance would eventually be honored. I raised my son, Michael, alone after his father vanished when Michael was 3 months old. No support, no apology, just silence. From that moment on, my life revolved around one purpose, making sure my son never felt abandoned. For decades, I succeeded, or so I thought. The woman who changed everything is my daughter-in-law, Jessica. She is not loud or openly cruel. Her cruelty is refined, controlled. She smiles while cutting you down, and people mistake her confidence for class. From the moment she married my son, I felt myself being repositioned not as family, but as an inconvenience that needed managing. Still, I tried. I stayed polite. I stayed careful. I stayed quiet. The night everything shattered, I drove 3 hours from Ohio to Chicago after Michael mentioned a family dinner. I assumed naively that I was included. I brought a peach cobbler, his favorite since childhood. I baked it that morning, wrapped it carefully, and imagined us sitting at the same table, pretending things were still normal. They weren't. Michael opened the door just enough to block the entrance. Jessica stood behind him, arms crossed, already smirking, as if she had been waiting for this moment. That's when he said it. "Mom, don't come anymore. My family doesn't need you." For a second, my mind refused to process the words. My body reacted before my pride could stop it. I reached out and grabbed his sleeve. "Michael, please," I said, my voice shaking. "What did I do? Just tell me what I did." That was my mistake. His face hardened, and suddenly he wasn't my son anymore. He yanked his arm away and raised his voice, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You're embarrassing," he snapped. "You're always embarrassing. You don't belong here, and you never did. You're clingy, needy, always acting like a victim. You think baking some cheap dessert gives you the right to invade our lives?" I stumbled back, stunned. "Michael," I whispered, "I'm your mother." "And that's the problem," he shouted. "You use that word like a weapon. I'm sick of it. Sick of you." End quote. He shoved my hand away again, harder this time. I lost my balance and fell onto the concrete porch. The baking dish shattered beside me. I felt a sharp pain on my palm, then warmth, blood. I was on the ground, bleeding, staring at my own son. Jessica laughed. Not nervously, not awkwardly. She laughed with amusement, like she'd just witnessed something entertaining. "Oh my God," she said, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I mean, always making a scene." I'm disturbed. She looked down at me, her eyes scanning my coat, my shoes, my broken dish. "You really don't get it, do you?" she continued. "You don't fit into our world. This isn't about love, Lorraine. It's about standards. My family is accomplished, educated, successful, and you—" She gestured vaguely at me on the ground, bleeding, humiliated. "You're just sad." Michael said nothing. He didn't help me up. He didn't tell her to stop. He didn't even look at the blood. In that moment, something inside me broke cleanly, like glass, not shattered, severed. I stood up slowly, my hand trembling, blood dripping onto the porch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't curse them. I simply looked at my son, memorizing his face as it was in that moment because I knew I would never see him the same way again. "I hope," I said quietly, "that one day you remember this night." Jessica rolled her eyes. Michael closed the door. The Uber driver asked if I was okay when he saw my hand. I told him I was fine. That was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. Back in my apartment, I cleaned the cut myself. The cobbler never made it to the table. Neither did I. That night, as I sat alone, replaying the shove, the laughter, the words, I realized something I had spent a lifetime avoiding. My son didn't just choose his wife over me. He chose cruelty, and he felt entitled to it. I opened my laptop, not in anger but in clarity. I looked at the joint accounts, the co-signed loans, the monthly transfers I had never stopped sending because I believed motherhood meant endless giving. But I was no longer his mother in his eyes. I was a stranger. And strangers do not fund the lives of people who bleed them and walk away. That night, I stopped asking what I had done wrong. And for the first time in my life, I asked a different question. Why was I still protecting people who had just proven they would never protect me? If this story resonates with you, please like the video and comment where you're watching from. Someone near you might be watching too. The next morning, the pain in my hand had dulled, but the ache in my chest had only deepened. I stood at the bathroom sink, rinsing the dried blood off my fingers, watching it spiral down the drain like everything I had poured into Michael's life. The small gash on my palm had crusted over during the night, but I still wrapped it carefully in gauze. It wasn't just about preventing infection, it was about reminding myself that wounds, even silent ones, need tending. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter from the cobbler that never made it to their table. I hadn't had the heart to throw away what was left of it, but today, I did. I scooped it into the trash, dish and all. The crash of ceramic against plastic felt final, like burying a memory. I sat at the dining table with my coffee, staring at the opposite chair. For 34 years, every decision I made had revolved around Michael. I sacrificed relationships, postponed dreams, stretched every dollar, believing that the reward would be a bond unbreakable, a gratitude that would grow with him. What I never planned for was being erased. My phone vibrated on the table. A new message. From Michael. Sorry about last night. Jess says maybe we can talk later, when things cool down. But for now, it's probably best if we all take space. Take space. That phrase. Sterile. Detached. Like he was managing a work conflict, not speaking to the woman who held his feverish body through childhood flu seasons, who stayed awake night after night, calculating how to pay rent and tuition. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the documents I hadn't looked at in years. The joint savings account, originally opened to help Michael when he first moved to Chicago, had ballooned to $47,000. Monthly deposits from my pension, birthday gifts I never got around to sending in cash, just in case, money. A lifeline I kept feeding long after he stopped needing it, because I thought that was love. Then there was the co-signed auto loan for the BMW Jessica insisted they needed. I hadn't questioned it at the time. Michael told me she'd gotten a promotion and needed something respectable for client meetings. I'd signed the papers with a smile, even joked, "You two drive safe now, you hear?" And now, I was the one left standing in the rain, bleeding. I started a new folder on my desktop. Reset. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. And I was 63 years old, too old to keep asking for permission to matter. I called my bank and made an appointment to meet in person. "I'd like to discuss my accounts," I said calmly. "I need to make some changes." "I know, eh?" After that, I called Sarah Whitman. She had been my lawyer for nearly 2 decades, helped me draw up my will after my mother passed, and had always spoken to me with respect. When her assistant picked up, I said, "Tell Sarah it's Lorraine. She'll know." Sarah called back within the hour. "Lorraine, it's been a while. You okay?" "No," I said, exhaling. "But I'm ready to fix that." I do that. Later that afternoon, I went into the spare room, the one I'd kept for Michael all these years, even though he hadn't slept in it since college. His old posters still hung on the walls. The twin bed was neatly made, the top drawer filled with mementos, graduation programs, his first paycheck copy, even a photo of the two of us at his 8th grade science fair. He'd won 2nd place for a volcano model we made together with baking soda and vinegar. I sat on the bed, holding that photo in my hand, letting the weight of the years wash over me. That boy loved me once. I know he did. But the man he became, the man who let me fall and bleed without flinching, that man had buried that love under pride and power. And still, a part of me ached to forgive him. But forgiveness, I was learning, doesn't always mean re-entry. I began boxing up the room. Not out of anger, but liberation. I labeled each box, memories, important, donation. It was time to reclaim my space, not just in my home, but in my own story. That evening, I met with Sarah at her office. She looked up from my documents and raised her eyebrows. "You want to remove him from everything?" Yes, I said, steady. All joint accounts, and I want to restructure my will. Sarah leaned back, studying me with the kind of quiet empathy I needed. Lorraine, this isn't easy. Are you sure? I nodded. He made it easy when he let me fall, when he let her laugh, when he called me embarrassing. Sarah didn't argue. She simply opened her drawer and pulled out the paperwork. Then let's get started. That night, I went home exhausted, but lighter. Like I had just stopped carrying a suitcase I didn't know I'd been dragging behind me for years. I made a cup of mint tea, sat by the window, and opened a notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote in all caps, "This is where it changes." I listed 5 things I wanted to reclaim. 1. My dignity. 2. My peace. 3. My voice. 4. My independence. 5. My future. I didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't walking it for someone else. I was walking it for me. And that, I told myself as I sipped my tea, was a beginning worth honoring. 3 days passed before I spoke to anyone about what had happened, not because I didn't have people I could talk to, but because I didn't have the words. How do you tell someone your child threw you away like a bag of yesterday's trash? How do you admit that you let it happen, little by little, in the name of love? On the 4th day, I got a knock at my door. It was Sharon. She was my next-door neighbor, 71, retired school librarian, sharp as a tack and twice as observant. She'd been bringing me homemade soup and unsolicited opinions since I moved into this apartment building 6 years ago. "You haven't walked the block in 3 days, she said, holding out a Tupperware container. "That's usually a sign either your hip is acting up or your heart is." I gave her a weak smile. Bit of both, maybe. She didn't push, just stepped inside and set the soup on the counter like she'd been doing it her whole life. "You got time to sit?" I nodded, and we sat in the living room. I told her everything. Not the polished version, not the downplayed one. The truth, raw, painful, humiliating. When I got to the part where Michael shoved me, where Jessica laughed, Sharon didn't gasp. She didn't cover her mouth. She just closed her eyes, took a breath, and said, "I'm sorry, Lorraine. That's the worst kind of pain. Not from strangers, from people you made." I felt the tears then. Not from her words, but from the kindness in her face. I hadn't cried when I fell. Not when I cleaned the blood. Not even when I deleted Michael's text. But now, with Sharon's hand on mine, I let the dam break. We sat in silence until my shoulders stopped shaking. "You know what I did when my oldest daughter told me I was a burden?" Sharon said quietly. "I rewrote my will. I gave her nothing, and then I joined a bowling league." I looked at her, eyes still damp. "A bowling league?" She nodded. "Met some of the best damn women I've ever known. Widows, divorcees, grandmas. All of us rejected, invisible, underestimated. But let me tell you something, Lorraine. There's power in choosing your people." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, I walked 2 blocks to the community center. There was a flyer on the bulletin board I'd seen 100 times but never paid attention to. "Women of Resilience, Thursday nights, room 3B. I showed up that Thursday, not knowing what to expect. The room smelled like old carpet and coffee. There were 12 women, all over 50, sitting in a circle with mismatched chairs. Some wore sweaters that looked hand-knitted, others crisp slacks and pearls. One woman had bright purple streaks in her hair. The leader, a tall woman named Evelyn with a raspy voice and silver curls, welcomed me with a nod. "New face?" "Lorraine," I said. "Just here to listen." They didn't ask for details, didn't prod, just let me sit and absorb. As the women shared their stories of marriages that broke them, children who forgot them, careers that overlooked them, I felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but belonging. At the end of the session, Evelyn said, "We're not here to fix the past, we're here to reclaim the future." That night, I walked home under a sky full of stars and thought, maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. The next morning, I went to the bank and finalized the paperwork with Mr. Jeffries. He'd known me since the 1990s, when I was still in my nurse scrubs and bringing Michael in to open his first savings account. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his pen hovering over the final signature. "I am," I said. "He's made his position clear. Now I'm doing the same." With one stroke of ink, I removed Michael from the joint account. Next, I froze the credit card tied to his name, closed it, not out of vengeance, but protection mine. I called Sarah to confirm the updates to my will. She told me it was done. Michael's name was no longer on any document that had power over my life. It felt like breathing after years of drowning. Later that day, I walked into the back room again, the one that used to be Michael's, and opened the final drawer. Inside was a stack of letters I had written him over the years. Birthday cards, college notes, even a letter I wrote but never sent after his wedding. I'd wanted to tell him how proud I was, how I hoped Jessica would love him as I had. I didn't read them. I burned them in the sink, one by one, not out of hate, out of closure. Then, I picked up the phone and called the community center. "This is Lorraine Harper. I'd like to sign up for the next session of Women of Resilience." "Welcome back, Lorraine," the receptionist said warmly. "We're glad to have you." For the first time in months, I smiled without bitterness. I had lost my son, yes, but maybe, just maybe, I was about to find myself. The call came on a Sunday morning, just after I'd returned from church. I still had my coat on, one hand holding my purse, the other balancing a half-eaten cranberry muffin wrapped in a napkin from the fellowship hall. I almost didn't answer when I saw Michael's name flash across the screen. My thumb hovered over the red button, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," he said, not even waiting for a greeting. "Why did you shut down the account?" Not hello, not how are you, just that sharp, accusatory, like I had committed a crime. I stayed silent for a beat, long enough for the sound of his heavy breathing to fill the pause. "Jessica was trying to order furniture," he continued, his voice rising, "and her card declined. Then I checked the account. And what the hell, Mom?" I placed the muffin on the table slowly, sat down in my favorite chair by the window, and looked outside as the autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the sidewalk. "I thought we agreed on some space," I said calmly. "That doesn't mean you just go behind my back and start sabotaging us." "Sabotaging?" I repeated, letting the words settle between us. "You know what I mean. This is petty, Mom. You're punishing me because you didn't get invited to dinner?" I closed my eyes, breathed. "You pushed me," I said evenly. "You shouted at me. You humiliated me. You let her laugh while I bled on your doorstep. And now you're angry because your credit card doesn't work?" There was silence on the other end, then a soft scoff. "Come on, you're being dramatic." I nearly laughed. Dramatic. The word echoed like an insult dressed up as concern. My blood had soaked into their porch, and now I was being called dramatic. "Michael," I said, my voice turning steely, "you and Jessica made it very clear. You don't consider me part of your family. That's your choice. But now, I'm making mine. You don't get to cut me off just because you're upset." "I don't owe you access to my money," I interrupted, sharp this time. "Not anymore. Not after what you said, what you did." He tried again, softer now, like he could walk it back. "We were just stressed. It wasn't personal." "No?" I said. "Then why did it hurt so much?" He didn't answer. "I wish you well," I added gently now. "I truly do. But you and Jessica will need to live within your means now. The way I did. The way I taught you." I ended the call. I expected the tears to come. They didn't. All I felt was a strange, cooling clarity, like air flowing through a room that had been shut too long. A few hours later, Sharon knocked on my door again. "Let me guess," she said, eyeing the mug of tea in my hand. "He called." I nodded. "And?" "I think he thought I'd roll over," I said, again. "Men like Michael don't know what to do when the faucet gets turned off," she replied. I chuckled, the first real laugh I'd had in days. "You have a metaphor for everything." "It's why I'm good at crossword puzzles," she winked. We talked for over an hour about grown children, about expectations, about the ways women like us had been taught that love meant giving until we had nothing left. "I used to think being a good mother meant never saying no," I admitted. "Now I wonder if I should have said it more." Sharon leaned back, her eyes soft. "We do the best we can with what we know. But when we know better, well, now that's when the real living starts." That evening, I got an email from Jessica. "Lorraine, I'm disappointed in how things have played out. You've put Michael in a terrible position. He's under stress at work, and this kind of drama is not helping. I'm willing to put the past behind us if you apologize and reinstate the financial arrangement. We all have to make sacrifices for family." "Jessica," I stared at it, stunned. Not because of her words, but because of the audacity, the entitlement, the manipulation disguised as civility. I didn't respond. Instead, I printed the email and placed it in a folder marked legal. I wasn't planning a war, but I was no longer walking into one unarmed. Later that week, I met with Sarah again. "Something tells me you're not just here for paperwork," she said as I sat down. I handed her the printed email. She read it, eyebrows raising slightly. "This is interesting." "It's leverage," I said, "in case they try anything. Jessica's smart, and I think she's planning something." Sarah nodded. "Then we'll be ready." I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months prepared. The next day, I returned to the community center, room 3B, Women of Resilience. Evelyn welcomed me with a long, knowing look. "You walked in here different tonight." "I walked in standing," I said. She smiled. "That's enough." We went around the circle, and this time, I shared. I told them about the porch, the push, the laughter, the account, about reclaiming my voice, my money, my worth. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then came a soft clap, then another, then all of them. "You're not the first," Evelyn said, "and you won't be the last. But you're one of the few who had the courage to walk through the fire and say, 'I'm still here.'" That night, I went home with a lighter step. I made myself dinner, baked salmon, roasted potatoes, and sautéed spinach. I lit a candle, sat at my small kitchen table, and ate alone, not in sadness, in peace. A week after the email, I received an official letter. Thick envelope, embossed lettering, law firm return address from downtown Chicago. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter, made myself a cup of tea, and stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if I waited long enough. It didn't. Eventually, I opened it with a knife, carefully slicing the flap like I was dissecting a wound that had only just begun to scab. Inside were 3 pages of carefully constructed language. A cease and desist letter. Jessica was threatening legal action for financial interference, emotional distress, and my favorite, intentional sabotage of marital stability. She accused me of freezing funds that were mutually relied upon, disrupting the peaceful functioning of their household, and contributing to Michael's workplace anxiety. In other words, I stopped funding their lifestyle, and now I was the villain. I sat back in my chair and laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was the kind that leaks out when absurdity and betrayal collide. Jessica had hired a lawyer to try to scare me into silence, into submission. She was turning the very things I had once given out of love into weapons. My first call was to Sarah. She didn't sound surprised. "Typical intimidation tactic," she said. "They're banking on fear. They want you to backtrack before they lose access." "It's not now, the Tim." "They're not getting a dime," I said firmly. "They made that clear when they told me I wasn't part of their family." Sarah chuckled. "Then let's make it official." She filed a formal response to the cease and desist, outlining the facts. The account was in my name, my earnings, no contractual obligation to maintain support, and no agreement written or verbal about shared financial commitments. Clean, legal, final. But while Sarah worked on that, I went to work on something else, my voice. That Thursday at the Women of Resilience group, I shared the letter with the circle. Evelyn read it aloud, her voice laced with just the right amount of sarcasm. "Oh, how dare you stop giving your grown son and his Ivy League wife free money." The horror. Laughter rippled through the room, warm and full of solidarity. "Let me guess," said Tamara, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with bold red lipstick. She came from money. The kind of people who call charity unseemly unless it's written on a gala invitation. I nodded. "Her mother calls me uncultured." "Oh, honey," Tamara leaned forward. "The most uncultured thing in the world is arrogance." It was the first time I felt defended. Not just legally, but emotionally. These women weren't pitying me. They were standing beside me. After the meeting, Evelyn pulled me aside. "You ever thought about telling your story?" "I am," I said, gesturing to the room. "No, I mean publicly, writing it, speaking it. There are thousands of women out there going through this exact thing, cut off, disrespected, shamed by their own blood. Your story could help them realize they're not crazy. I blinked. The idea of speaking publicly about my pain felt too big, too exposed, but also powerful. I don't know, I said. Maybe. Well, think about it, she said, because your strength isn't just in surviving, it's in being seen. That is reverie. It is a very for men. That night, I sat at my dining table with an old notebook. I flipped to a blank page, then wrote across the top, things they tried to take from me. I wrote, asterisk, my voice, asterisk, my dignity, asterisk, my place at the table, my story. And underneath, I wrote in bold, they don't get to keep them. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Michael. Mom, can we talk? I stared at it, thumb hovering again. A week ago, I might have answered, but I needed to understand his motive, not just his words. I replied simply, about what? He responded quickly, Jessica's upset. She thinks you're trying to ruin us. I just want peace. Then stop choosing silence when she attacks me, I replied. Peace doesn't come from pretending nothing happened. He didn't text back. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Reverend Harris, the pastor at the church Michael and Jessica attended in Chicago. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered him from Michael's wedding, sharp suit, deep voice, always quoting Proverbs. Lorraine, he said, I received a concerning letter from Jessica. She's saying you've become combative and unstable. She's worried about your mental state. It's not really dough. I closed my eyes. Of course. This was the next move, discredit me emotionally. I'm doing just fine, Reverend, I said evenly. Perhaps you should be asking her what prompted this supposed concern. He paused. I had a feeling there was more to the story. There always is. He thanked me for my time and promised to follow up. I wasn't sure what good it would do, but it reminded me of something important. I needed to be prepared for character assassination. Jessica wasn't done. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. That night, I pulled the letter from the envelope again, placed it beside Jessica's email, and added a new label to my folder, Reputation Defense. I wasn't just protecting my money anymore. I was protecting my name. I had always believed in quiet dignity. My mother used to say, Lorraine, don't ever make a mess louder than the injustice itself. I lived by that principle. I bit my tongue when coworkers took credit for my work, when neighbors made assumptions about me, when men called me girl in meetings I ran. But now, standing at 63 years old, watching my life rewritten in whispers and legal threats, I realized something. Dignity without defense is just surrender dressed in pearls. Jessica's campaign to discredit me was in full swing. Within days, I received a message from Sister Gwen at Street. Mark's the church I'd attended for over 25 years. Lorraine, honey, her voice trembled through the phone. I don't want to pry, but I heard you've been going through something. Someone said you're not well? Not well. That phrase again, the subtle way people suggest you're unhinged when they want you to disappear. I took a deep breath. I'm doing fine, Gwen, but thank you for checking on me. She hesitated. If you ever want to talk, I will, I said, when I'm ready. End quote. After the call, I went straight to my closet and pulled out a navy blue dress, my good church dress, the one with the soft pleats and gold buttons. I hadn't worn it in over a year. I ironed it with care, like I was preparing armor. Then I called Sarah. I want to attend their church service, I said. This Sunday. Sarah paused. Are you sure? Yes. They want to question my character in the place where I once held my son in my arms during his baptism. Then I'll show up and let them look me in the eyes. She didn't argue, just said, be careful. They play clean in public, dirty in private. That Sunday, I arrived early, sat near the front, same pew I used to sit in with Michael when he was little, legs too short to reach the floor, always falling asleep on my shoulder halfway through the sermon. Heads turned as I entered. Whispers followed. Some offered polite nods. Others avoided my gaze altogether. But I kept my head high, my hands steady in my lap. When Reverend Harris began his sermon, his eyes landed on me more than once. His voice was steady, but there was a tension in the air. Halfway through, he quoted Proverbs 6:16-19 about things the Lord hates: a lying tongue, a heart that devises wicked schemes, a false witness who pours out lies. Jessica and Michael arrived late, sat on the opposite side of the sanctuary. I didn't turn to look, but I felt them. After the service, I stood outside in the courtyard, letting the fall sun warm my face. A few older members approached me, quiet support, subtle affirmations. "Good to see you back, Lorraine. We missed your peach cobbler at the last potluck. I always liked your hat collection." Small words, but they mattered. Then I saw her, Jessica, approaching me like a woman who thought the ground would part for her steps. She wore a beige coat cinched tightly at the waist, her lipstick sharp and red as a warning. "Lorraine," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "This little performance, it won't work." I blinked. "I came to church." "You came to provoke," she hissed, the corners of her mouth twitching into a smile. "You want people to feel sorry for you. But Michael and I? We don't play victim." I stepped closer. "No, Jessica. You just create victims and call it strategy." Her smile faltered. "You have no idea what you're up against." "Oh, but I do," I said softly. "You're counting on silence. You're counting on shame. But I've already lost everything I feared losing. Now I've got nothing left but truth, and women like me don't run from the truth." She opened her mouth, but I turned and walked away, not waiting for her next line. Let her deliver it to the wind. The next day, I met with Sarah and handed her a written account of the courtyard interaction. "She's unraveling," I said. Sarah scanned it quickly. "You're documenting everything. That's good. Very good." "I want to go further," I added. "I want to find out what she's really hiding." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think there's more?" "I think women like Jessica don't build fortresses unless they're hiding something in the basement. 84 men of them. We agreed to run background checks, not just on her, but on her mother, Eleanor Whitmore, the one pulling strings from the shadows. I wanted to know what money was flowing where, what debts existed, what private deals had been whispered behind closed doors. "I'm not going after them," I said. "I'm protecting myself." Sarah nodded. "Understood. But Lorraine, once we open this door, you can't unsee what's inside." I looked her in the eyes. "Then let's open it wide." End quote, end quote. That evening, I returned to room 3B at the community center. The women clapped when I entered. Evelyn smiled like she'd been expecting me to shine a little brighter. "I saw you at church," she said. "You wore that navy blue dress like it was a crown." I smiled. It felt like one. After the session, I stayed behind to help clean up. Evelyn handed me a stack of chairs, then paused. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" she said. "Understand what?" "That survival isn't just about living through something, it's about refusing to shrink afterward." I nodded slowly. "I think I'm ready to stop shrinking." That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They may have started the fire, but I'm learning how to walk through it without burning." The background check came back faster than I expected. Sarah called me 3 days after our meeting, her tone clipped but intrigued. "You were right," she said. "There's more beneath the surface." I was sitting at the kitchen table folding laundry towels that still smelled faintly of lavender and the summer I'd once spent teaching Michael how to do laundry properly. He'd ruined a whole load of whites with a red sock. I remembered laughing as we stood over the pink disaster, him swearing never to live alone. The memory, so warm and vivid, felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. "What did you find?" I asked Sarah. "A series of quiet loan defaults tied to Eleanor Whitmore's business accounts," she said. "Real estate partnerships that went under, all filed discreetly through shell companies. Jessica signed off on 2 of them as a guarantor. Small print, but legal." "So they're in debt?" "Deeply." "And those joint assets with Michael?" "Jessica's been moving them, transferring funds into private accounts in her name only." I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat steady. "She's building her parachute," I said. Sarah sighed. "Looks that way. She's insulating herself in case the marriage falls apart or the lawsuits come." "And Michael?" I asked. "Either he doesn't know or he doesn't want to know." I hung up, not out of anger, but out of strategy. My instincts had never failed me. Jessica wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous in the quiet way, the kind that hid behind laws, smiled during betrayal, and left no fingerprints on the knife. I spent the rest of the day in motion. I baked cornbread for Sharon, repotted my plants, reorganized the closet. Grief used to paralyze me. Now, it made me clean, made me prepare, because I knew the real confrontation wasn't behind me. It was coming. That Thursday, during our group session at the community center, I stayed after the others left. Evelyn noticed. "You've got that look," she said, stacking plastic chairs. "What look?" "The look of a woman who just found out her enemy is made of paper, not stone." End quote. I smiled faintly. "I have a question." "Ask." "Do you think it's wrong to expose someone if they've spent years hiding behind lies?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "Is it wrong to tell the truth?" "No." "Then ask yourself this. Who benefits from your silence?" The question settled like a stone in my chest. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea and looked through the manila folder I'd started keeping on Jessica and her mother. Transactions, dates, whispers collected in black and white. A story was forming, not the one they told at charity events and board meetings, but the one built on manipulation, appearance, and control. The next morning, I made my decision. I wasn't going to the press, not yet. I wasn't going to make a scene or air dirty laundry on Facebook like Jessica surely feared. No, I was going to deliver truth the way I'd always delivered meals to my patients, quietly, methodically, and with the intention of healing. I called Reverend Harris. "Good morning, Lorraine," he said, cautious. "I'd like to request a private meeting," I said. "About something important." He hesitated. "Jessica and Michael have already spoken with me, you know." "I'm aware. I'd like to tell you what they didn't." He agreed. That Sunday afternoon, I sat in his office with a folder in my lap. He wore the same kind eyes I remembered from Michael's baptism, though now they were rimmed with doubt, tired from the tug-of-war he was being dragged into. "I don't want to divide the church," I said softly. "I'm not here to seek revenge, but I can't let a lie grow legs and run free while the truth sits on its hands." I handed him the folder. He read in silence for almost 15 minutes. I watched his eyebrows rise, his mouth tighten. "This," he whispered, "Lorraine, this is serious." "It is." He closed the folder. "You don't want to make this public? I want you to know. In case she tries to turn more people against me, I want to protect myself, and I want you to understand who's behind the narrative you've been handed." He nodded slowly. "Thank you for trusting me." As I stood to leave, he said, "You've always carried yourself with grace, Lorraine. That's why this whole situation felt off to me. Now I see why." On my way home, I felt lighter, not vindicated, but fortified. That evening I opened my notebook again. This time, I wrote, "The truth doesn't shout. It stands still and lets the liars exhaust themselves." I flipped to the first page and saw what I had written weeks earlier, things they tried to take from me. I added one more line beneath it, "But I'm still standing." The first real fallout came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sipping my coffee black, no sugar, the way I took it since my nursing days when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I let calls like that go to voicemail, but something nudged me to answer. "Lorraine Harper?" The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, professional. "Yes. This is Diane Vaughn, assistant to attorney Ronald Glenn. We represent Jessica Whitmore Harper. I'm calling to inform you that a formal civil complaint has been filed on behalf of our client, alleging defamation of character, unlawful disclosure of private financial information, and intentional emotional distress. You will receive the paperwork by certified mail." She paused, as if expecting me to gasp. I didn't. Instead, I said, "Tell Jessica I look forward to discovery." The silence on the line was exquisite. I hung up, walked to the kitchen, and placed my coffee cup in the sink. I didn't tremble. I didn't panic. Because this wasn't unexpected. Jessica had finally overplayed her hand, and now we'd play mine. Within the hour, Sarah had the documents in her inbox. She scanned them while I listened on speakerphone. "They don't have a case," she said. "At best, this is a scare tactic. At worst, it's a stunt to muddy the waters. But they've opened the door now. That means we can request her financials, too." "And we will," I said. Sarah's voice held a note of admiration. "You're calm." "I'm tired," I said honestly. "But that's not the same thing." That afternoon, I received the certified envelope. I opened it at my kitchen table, read every line, and made 2 photocopies, one for Sarah, one for my file. Then I took the original and burned it in a ceramic dish on my back porch, watching the flames curl the edges, dissolve the ink, release the last of my fear into the wind. Later that evening, I received a call I didn't expect. Lorraine? The voice was soft, uncertain. It was Michael. I heard you're being sued, he said after a long pause. So it's finally real for you? I asked. He exhaled. Jessica said you went to Reverend Harris with fabricated documents, that you're trying to destroy our lives. And what do you believe, Michael? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I don't know, he said. This is all spiraling. My boss pulled me aside today. Someone forwarded them the court filing. I'm under review. Jessica's freaking out. My credit card was declined yesterday. We're drowning. I stayed silent, letting him speak into his own chaos. I don't know what to do anymore, he finally said, almost a whisper. Then start by telling the truth, I replied. To yourself first. He went quiet. Then, can we meet? I hesitated. Every part of me ached for resolution, but I'd learned enough now to know that apologies asked for under pressure rarely come from the heart. Not yet, I said. When you're ready to talk as my son, not as her husband or her mouthpiece, I'll be here. That night, I journaled again. But instead of a list, I wrote a letter to myself. Dear Lorraine, you were never the villain. You were the boundary. And people don't like boundaries when they're used to access without accountability. But you stood. You bled. You rose. And now you lead. The next day, I returned to the Women of Resilience group with a new fire in my chest. When I walked in, the energy shifted. Evelyn smiled knowingly. You've got court papers in your purse, don't you? I laughed, the sound surprising even me. I do, Tamara clapped. It's official now. You're one of us. We spent the evening sharing tactics, legal referrals, emotional strategies. One woman, Margot, who'd been through a similar lawsuit with her daughter's husband, offered me a gem of wisdom. They want to make you feel guilty for setting a limit, she said. But guilt is just grief in disguise. You're grieving the mother-son bond you thought was unbreakable. That's normal, but it's not your fault it broke. Her words stayed with me the rest of the night. I went home and pulled out old photographs. Me and Michael at Disneyland. Him asleep in the hospital bed after his appendix surgery. Me holding him, tears in my eyes, the day he got accepted into college. I placed them gently in a box labeled Truth. I wasn't throwing them away. I was honoring them, and I was choosing not to let them be used against me. Jessica might control the narrative in her circles, but I was reclaiming the truth where it mattered most. In the quiet, in the facts, in the hearts of people who knew me not through gossip, but through history. As I turned off the lights that night, I whispered to the dark. I'm not afraid of courtrooms. I've walked through fire. This is just another hallway. The morning of the first court hearing, I dressed deliberately. I chose a charcoal gray pantsuit with soft pleats that fell just right. It had belonged to my sister, Margaret, before she passed. She always said, "Don't wear black to battle gray says you're calm but not defeated." I pinned a small gold brooch at my collar, the one Michael had given me for Mother's Day when he was 10, shaped like a heart, chipped on the edge from years of moving house to house. I wore it anyway. Not for him, but for the memory of the boy I raised. Sarah met me on the courthouse steps. You ready? She asked, clutching her briefcase. I've been ready, I said. They're the ones late to the truth. Inside, the courtroom was quiet and clinical. Pale blue walls, oak benches, the scent of polished wood and nerves. Jessica sat at the plaintiff's table in a cream-colored suit, flanked by her attorney. Her posture screamed control, but her eyes darted nervous, calculating. Michael sat beside her, head down. He didn't look at me. When the judge entered, we rose. The proceedings began. Motions were filed, documents passed, the usual legal choreography. But when the judge asked if either party wished to make a statement, Jessica stood. She painted herself as a victim. A respected attorney, she said, voice calm and well-rehearsed, a devoted wife. And I, her mother-in-law, was vindictive, unstable, unable to let go of her adult son. I didn't flinch. When it was our turn, Sarah stood, her voice steady, her eyes sharp. Your Honor, she said, we have evidence of financial deception, emotional manipulation, and targeted defamation on the part of the plaintiff. We're not just defending a boundary. We're defending the truth. I have Deverett Vord, Then she handed over the documents: bank transfers, private emails, even the footage of the church courtyard where Jessica had confronted me, unaware that the church security cameras had captured everything. Jessica's expression changed as the judge flipped through the file. Her confidence cracked, just a little. The hearing ended without a verdict. This was just procedural, but the atmosphere shifted. We weren't playing defense anymore. We walked out of the courthouse in silence. On the steps, I paused. Michael was behind me, lagging a few feet. I turned to him. He looked up, our eyes meeting for the first time in months. There was something in his face: confusion, maybe shame. "Why didn't you say something?" he asked softly. "I did," I replied. "You just weren't listening." He looked down. "She said you were trying to ruin us." "No, Michael, I was trying to protect what I built. I was trying to protect you even when you stopped protecting me." "I'm Selv." I walked away before he could answer. That evening, back home, I let myself feel everything. I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, the fall air crisp and honest. Sharon came by with a casserole and 2 small glasses of brandy. "To court battles and calm hands," she toasted. I laughed. I wasn't calm inside, but you were calm outside. That's what wins wars. Later, after Sharon left, I opened my notebook and flipped to a new page. "What court can't see?" Asterisk. The sound of my son's first heartbeat on the monitor. Asterisk. The smell of his baby shampoo. Asterisk. The tears I wiped after every schoolyard fight. Asterisk. The lunches packed, the birthdays remembered, the nights I stayed awake praying he'd get home safe. I stared at the list for a long time. Then I added, "And still, I am the one defending my right to dignity." The next morning, I received an email from Reverend Harris. "Lorraine." I watched the footage. "I'm so sorry for ever doubting you. I've spoken to the deacons. We will support you however we can. Pastor H." It was a small victory, but it mattered. Later that week, at the community center, Evelyn pulled me aside. "You're walking different," she said. "I'm healing," I replied. "No, healing is quiet. You're rising," Tamara added. "We've been waiting for you to realize what we already knew. You're not just surviving, Lorraine. You're leading." I looked around the room, these women who had become my circle, my fortress, and I realized something profound. I had lost a son, but I had gained a sisterhood. A week after the hearing, I received a package in the mail. No return address, no name. Inside was a manila envelope. I opened it carefully, expecting more legal nonsense, perhaps another veiled threat. But what I found were photographs, printed, full color, at least 20 of them, all of Jessica, none of them innocent. One showed her entering a downtown hotel. Another, her at dinner holding hands with a man I didn't recognize. A few more of them together on a beach somewhere, clearly not Michael, clearly not business. The final photo was the most damning. Jessica, kissing him. Full, lingering, unmistakable. I stared at the pictures. My heart caught somewhere between satisfaction and sorrow. Whoever sent them hadn't included a note, but the message was clear. Someone wanted me to know the truth, and they wanted me to use it. I called Sarah immediately. "I received something unexpected," I said. She came by that afternoon, and together we examined the evidence. She wore her reading glasses low on her nose, her fingers moving the photos like cards in a game of strategy. "This changes everything," she said. "Infidelity makes a big difference in cases involving character claims, especially if she's trying to claim emotional distress." "Do we tell Michael?" I asked. Sarah looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Do you want to?" I didn't answer right away. I sat down, the photos still fanned out on the table. The woman in them, elegant, calculating, was the same one who had laughed while I bled, who called me uncultured, who tried to erase me from my own family. "I want him to see who she really is," I said, "but I want to do it without becoming like her." Sarah nodded. "We can present this through the court. Let the facts do the speaking." And that's what we did. The next hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. This time, I didn't feel nervous. I felt grounded, ready. Jessica arrived dressed in all white, ironic, given what we were about to show. Her lawyer walked with a little less spring in his step. Michael followed behind, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor. When Sarah submitted the photographs into the official record, the courtroom held its breath. Jessica's lawyer leaned over to whisper, his face turning a shade paler with each image. Jessica stared forward, unmoved. But I saw it, the twitch at her jawline, the stiffening of her spine. The only thing she didn't do was look at Michael. He, on the other hand, looked at me, then at her, then back at me. His face was unreadable, but I saw the cracks. His illusion had shattered. Outside, after the hearing, I stood beneath a tree whose leaves had turned a brilliant orange. The wind carried the scent of October, and for a moment, I felt steady, like the earth itself was shifting in my favor. Michael approached. "Where did you get those?" he asked, his voice quiet. "They were sent to me anonymously," I said. "But I verified them." He rubbed his face, shoulders slumped. "She said they were old, from before we got married." I tilted my head. "And do you believe her?" He didn't answer. "I know you want to," I said gently, "because believing her means you don't have to admit what you missed, or ignored." He looked at the ground. "I don't know what's real anymore." "That's the thing about truth," I said. "It doesn't need you to believe in it to be real. It's crossed a very frayed." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't know how I got here." I placed a hand on his arm, not out of invitation, but acknowledgement. "None of us gets here alone," I said. "But we all choose whether to stay." Then I turned and walked away. Because this moment wasn't about whether Michael could change. It was about me recognizing that I already had. Back home, I sat with my notebook. When the mask slips, don't be surprised by the face underneath. Be proud you finally stopped pretending you didn't see it. That evening, I cooked myself a full meal. Nothing fancy, just fried catfish, collard greens, and cornbread, the way my mama used to make on Sundays. I lit a candle, poured a glass of sweet tea, sat alone, and I didn't feel lonely, because in the space Jessica tried to shrink me, I had expanded. The fallout didn't take long. 2 days after the hearing, Michael showed up at my apartment, unannounced, alone. I was in the middle of sweeping the kitchen when I heard the knock. A familiar rhythm, 3 slow taps, like he used to do as a kid when he didn't want to wake me up too loudly. I opened the door to find him standing there, thinner than I remembered, with a look in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was 16 and wrecked his friend's car trying to impress a girl. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He stood awkwardly in the living room, eyes flicking to the framed photos on the wall, pictures he hadn't looked at in years. Him at graduation, us at his white coat ceremony when he briefly considered med school, a family trip to Cleveland before things began to fray. "Do you want some tea?" I asked, already moving to the kitchen. He nodded. "Please." We sat at the dining table, a mug between us. The silence held weight, but not the kind that smothered, more like the kind that made room. "I filed for separation," he said finally. I looked at him. "So soon?" "She admitted it," he continued. "The affair. Said it didn't mean anything, that it started after we got married." I didn't flinch. I didn't say, "I told you so." I simply sipped my tea. "I don't know what's worse," he said. "That she lied, or that I let her." "You didn't let her," I said quietly. "You believed in her because you wanted to. That's not a crime, Michael. It's a wound." He nodded, eyes moistening. "She controlled everything," he said. "The money, the calendar, even who I talked to. At first it felt like support. Later it felt like suffocation. And when I started to speak up, I said, I became the threat." He looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Mom, for pushing you, for saying those things, for letting her—" I stopped him with a raised hand. "You made your choices, Michael, and now you're making new ones. That's what matters. Wear firm." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling like he hadn't taken a deep breath in months. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. How did you forgive Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "I didn't," I said after a long pause. "Not in the way people think. I let go of the anger because it was making me sick. But I never forgot, and I never let him back in." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. "I think I was trying to prove something," he said. "That I could create a perfect family, that I could do it better than he did." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to ghosts." We sat like that for a while, the silence now warm, a bridge rather than a barrier. "I'm going to move out," he said, Get my own place. Start over. I'm proud of you, I said. I don't deserve that yet. Then earn it, I replied. When he left, I didn't cry. Not out of pride, but because something deeper was settling. A slow, careful restoration not of what we were, but of what we could be. That evening, I went to the Women of Resilience group and told them everything. About the photos, the court, the visit. Tamara nodded. He's waking up, Evelyn added, but he still has to walk out of the wreckage on his own. I know, I said, but for the first time I'm not standing in the rubble waiting for him. The women clapped. Not for drama, not for show, for truth. Before I left, Evelyn handed me a small notebook. For your next chapter, she said. Whatever you decide it is. That night, I sat on my porch under a clear sky. I opened the notebook and wrote, My son is not my savior, nor my burden. He is a man I raised, and now he must raise himself. I closed the notebook, and for the first time in years, I didn't wonder if I'd done enough. I knew I had. The first night Michael spent in his new apartment, he called me. I don't even know how to work this stove, he admitted, half laughing, half embarrassed. I just stood there staring at it like it was a spaceship. Did you read the manual? I asked. No, he grinned through the phone. I figured if you raised me, I could figure out a hot plate. I smiled. Well, if you burn down the building, don't tell them your mama taught you. It was the first easy conversation we'd had in years. Nothing heavy, no accusations or apologies. Just a moment between mother and son, light, human, ordinary. And somehow, that felt more healing than all the apologies in the world. The next day, I took Sharon to the farmer's market. We strolled slowly past the apple stands, jars of honey, squash stacked like art. I bought a small bundle of marigolds. She bought 2 jars of blackberry jam, because I might want one now, and one for when I change my mind. On our way home, she looked at me and said, You seem settled. End quote. I feel settled, I replied, like a window finally closed on a draft that had been chilling the whole house. Back at home, I placed the marigolds in a jar on the kitchen table. A small thing, but something about them, their boldness, their unapologetic color made me feel alive. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Reverend Harris. Lorraine, I've spoken with the deacons. We're inviting you back to lead the Thanksgiving community outreach this year. If you're willing, I stared at the message, stunned. Every year since Michael was 12, I'd led that outreach, organizing food drives, cooking, delivering meals to shut-ins. It had always been my favorite part of the season, until Jessica's quiet campaign had pushed me out. Now, they wanted me back. I replied simply, I'd be honored. That evening, I met with Sarah to go over the final stages of the legal proceedings. Jessica's lawyers had gone quiet after the photos. The civil complaint was unofficially withdrawn, no announcement, no apology. Just silence, as if nothing had happened. She'll never admit it, Sarah said. But she knows the truth has her cornered. I don't need her to admit it, I said. I just need her to stop touching what isn't hers. Sarah smiled. You're good at this. At what? At defending what matters. Most people don't know how. After she left, I found myself standing in front of the mirror in the hallway. I studied my reflection not out of vanity, but curiosity. Who was this woman now? My skin was soft in places, creased in others. My hair, streaked with silver, framed a face that had seen enough to know what truly counted. And in my eyes, there was something I hadn't seen in a long time. Stillness, not emptiness. Stillness. The quiet after the storm when you realize you're still standing and the world didn't break you, it sharpened you. That night, I called Michael again. Need any help building furniture? I asked. He chuckled. You mean moral support while I curse at instruction manuals? I'll bring Allen wrenches and cookies. He paused. Thank you, Mom, for still showing up. I'm not showing up for who you were, I said. I'm showing up for who you're trying to be. I could hear the emotion in his breath, but he didn't speak. Some things don't need words. Later, I sat at the table with my new notebook, the one Evelyn had given me. On the first page, I wrote, I lost a version of motherhood that no longer served me. In its place, I found myself. I tore out the page gently, folded it, and placed it in a small tin box of keepsakes alongside the brooch, a photo of me and Michael from years ago, and the receipt from the first court filing, now yellowed at the edges. Because some victories aren't loud, they're preserved in pieces. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of chill that sinks into your bones, not cruel, just persistent. The kind that made me grateful for the thick scarf Margaret had knitted me years ago, the one with mismatched yarn she'd found at a church sale. I wrapped it tight as I stepped into Street Mark's kitchen, where the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes hit me like a warm memory. It had been 4 years since I last led the Thanksgiving outreach. Now, here I was again, older, wiser, no longer someone's afterthought. "Lorraine!" Sister Gwen rushed over, wiping her hands on her apron. "We were so lost without you. These casseroles were starting to look like soup." I laughed, grabbed an oven mitt, and got to work. The room was full volunteers, trays of food, laughter humming like a hymn beneath the bustle. It felt like something holy. Michael arrived 2 hours in. He walked in carrying 3 grocery bags and a nervous smile. I wasn't sure what to bring, so I just grabbed canned yams, pie crusts, and batteries. I raised an eyebrow. "Batteries? Just in case someone's mixer dies?" he offered sheepishly. The kitchen laughed, and the ice cracked a little more. I directed him to the prep table, where he started peeling apples beside 2 teenage boys from the youth group. I watched from across the room as he laughed with them, the way he used to laugh with me, easy, unguarded, like someone remembering the best parts of themselves. Later, as the serving line opened and people from the neighborhood began to arrive, some hungry, some lonely, all welcome, Michael stood by my side, dishing mashed potatoes with the grace of a man trying to atone quietly. "Mom," he said softly when there was a lull. Jessica moved out. I didn't react, just kept spooning food onto plates. "She left a note," he continued. "No confrontation, just keys on the counter and a signed divorce agreement." I turned to him then. His eyes were red, but he wasn't breaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not just for her, for what I became while I was with her." I nodded slowly. "I'm glad you can see it now, but that's your work to do, not mine to finish." "I know. And Michael," I paused, letting the air stretch between us. "If you want me in your life, don't just apologize when things go wrong. Show up when things are right." He looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my son, not the man warped by pride and pressure, but the boy who used to slip notes into my lunchbox that read, "Best mom ever." "I will," he said. That night, after the last pie was served and the folding chairs stacked, I walked the halls of the church alone. I passed the nursery where I once rocked Michael to sleep during choir rehearsals, past the bulletin board still tacked with my old flyers, fundraiser bake sale, blood drive, holiday toy collection. I paused by the sanctuary doors and stepped inside. The space was dim, quiet. I sat in the front pew and let the silence hold me. Gratitude came, not like a rush, but a gentle settling. I wasn't thankful for the betrayal, but I was thankful for what it revealed. I wasn't thankful for the loss, but I was thankful for the clarity it forced me to claim. I wasn't thankful for Jessica, but I was deeply thankful she was no longer writing chapters in my story. Back home, I changed into my flannel pajamas, made a cup of peppermint tea, and opened my notebook. This time, I didn't write a list. I wrote a truth. Some families break you, some families build you, and sometimes the one you build for yourself from the ashes is stronger than the one that burned. I looked out the window. The marigolds on my table had begun to wilt, but even in their fading, they stood bold, just like me. Christmas came quietly that year. No big tree, no piles of presents, just a small wreath on my door and a few candles on the windowsill, one for peace, one for strength, and one for the things I let go. Michael called the week before. He didn't ask if he could come by. He asked if I would consider coming to his place. "I want to cook you dinner," he said. I hesitated. The mother in me wanted to protect him, still the instinct to swoop in, fix the mess, bring order. But something else held me back. I didn't want to be invited out of pity or guilt. "Why?" I asked. He was silent for a moment. Then, "Because it's the first Christmas, I'm not pretending. I want to spend it with someone who sees me, even when I'm still figuring out who I am." End quote. So, on Christmas Eve, I bundled up and rode the bus across town to his new apartment, a modest one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, not far from where he and Jessica used to live, but miles away in spirit. He greeted me at the door with an apron tied crooked over his sweater and flour on his cheek. "I tried to make your sweet potato pie," he said. "It smells like regret, but I tried." I laughed and stepped inside. The place was warm, both in temperature and feel. He decorated with string lights, mismatched ornaments, and a single card on the mantel that read, "Start over." He led me to the kitchen, where a roast was in the oven, and the table was set with care, 2 plates, cloth napkins, my mother's old silverware. He'd clearly asked Sharon or someone for guidance. "I'm impressed," I said, lifting the lid on the cornbread. "This isn't bad." He grinned. "I may have watched a few YouTube videos. Also, I kind of bribed Sister Gwen with a tin of cookies to walk me through it." Dinner was awkward in the way that healing often is. Moments of silence, cautious laughter, but no more masks. Michael didn't try to perform. He asked about the community center, about my neighbors, about the women in the resilience group. "You always find people to uplift," he said, "even when you're the one who needed lifting." "I used to think that made me strong," I said. "But sometimes I think I did it because I didn't believe anyone would catch me if I fell." Michael grew quiet. "I wasn't there," he whispered. "You're here now," I replied. "That counts." After dinner, we moved to the couch with slices of the not-so-successful sweet potato pie. He took one bite and grimaced. "Okay, yeah, this is terrible." I burst into laughter, the kind that shakes your shoulders and feels like medicine. "I'll teach you the real recipe," I promised. "But only if you promise not to sabotage it with nutmeg." We sat there, 2 people rebuilding a bridge, one awkward slice at a time. Eventually he asked, "Do you think she ever really loved me?" I looked at him, not as a mother shielding him from pain, but as a woman who had lived enough to know the answer. "I think she loved what you gave her. The image, the access, the control, but I don't think she saw you. Not really." "It's no him," he nodded, and I saw at the first real crack of release in his face. "I want to do better," he said. "With you. With everyone." "Then do better," I said simply. "Don't ask for it. Just do it." When I left later that night, he walked me to the bus stop, hands in his coat pockets, the air between us warmer than it had been in years. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, his voice thick. "Merry Christmas, baby." On the ride home, I stared out the window as snow began to fall soft, steady, forgiving. The city blurred into a wash of light and motion. Back in my apartment, I lit the last candle on the sill, the one for what I'd let go, and watched it flicker until it burned down to a soft glow. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "He's not my redemption. He's my reflection, flawed, trying, human, and that is enough." January arrived with the kind of wind that made you rethink every decision that required leaving the house. I spent the first few days of the new year in quiet, no resolutions, no grand declarations. Just a steady rhythm of tea, books, and walks through the neighborhood when the sun broke through the clouds. Michael texted every few days. Nothing dramatic, just check-ins, updates, photos of the scrambled eggs he was learning not to burn. I responded with emojis, short encouragements. We were finding our language again, slowly, respectfully. Then one afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, in an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a single page, neat, cursive, from Eleanor Whitmore, Jessica's mother. My hands stilled. I hadn't heard from her since before the lawsuits, since she'd looked me up and down at a charity gala and said, "Your presence disrupts more than it elevates." End quote. The letter read, "Lorraine, you've made quite the spectacle of our family. I hope you understand that some bridges were not meant to be crossed. My daughter may have made mistakes, but public humiliation is hardly the moral high ground. Some of us operate in quieter circles, ones you'll never understand. Do yourself a favor. Fade back into your world. You may have won the court of sympathy, but that isn't the only court that matters." After Dine, Whitmore, I folded the letter slowly, calmly, and placed it on the table. Then I picked up my phone and called Sarah. "I think it's time we go public," I said. "You're sure?" "I'm done being whispered about," I replied. "Let them speak my name in the open." 2 weeks later, with Sarah's guidance and protection, I published a personal essay on a community platform, an open letter titled, "When Dignity is Not Enough, A Mother's Quiet War." I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I told my story the way I had lived it truthfully, emotionally, with all the grit and grace I could muster. I wrote about the pain of losing your place in your child's life, the gaslighting, the classism, the wounds hidden behind "bless your heart" smiles. I wrote about how silence protects the wrong people, and how justice sometimes arrives not with a bang, but with a steady, persistent voice saying, "No more." The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from women across the country. I thought I was the only one. "You just wrote the words I couldn't say. Thank you for standing up. For standing still. For standing at all." The essay was shared by advocacy groups, community leaders, even a few local news outlets. My phone rang with requests for interviews. I declined most. I wasn't looking for fame, just daylight. A week later, I returned to room 3B at the community center. This time, I was asked to speak to share not just as a participant, but as a woman who'd walked through the storm and come out clear-eyed. Evelyn introduced me. "This is Lorraine," she said. "She doesn't just tell stories. She teaches you how to live through them." I stood at the front, hands steady. "I didn't want to be brave," I began. "I just didn't want to disappear." I told them about the letter, about the court, about how being erased by your own child doesn't feel like a knife. It feels like a slow, quiet unthreading. "But here's the thing," I said. "People who underestimate you are counting on your silence. When you speak, when you live out loud, it terrifies them." The room went still. Then, applause. Not the kind that seeks to flatter. The kind that says, "We see you." Afterward, a woman approached me. Mid-50s, soft eyes. She clutched my hand like it was a lifeline. "My daughter married a man just like your son's wife," she whispered. "I haven't seen my grandbaby in 2 years." I nodded. "That pain doesn't go away, but neither does your truth." That night, I went home and lit a candle. Not for what I lost, for what I claimed. In my notebook, I wrote, "The world tells women like me to disappear quietly. I chose to stay. And in staying, I became visible." February came with a softness I didn't expect. For the first time in years, I noticed how the afternoon sun stretched long across the floorboards of my apartment, how the air smelled faintly of honeysuckle from the neighbor's window box, how silence, when earned, didn't feel like absence, it felt like peace. One Sunday morning, Michael picked me up for brunch. No special occasion, no guilt-driven agenda, just him, showing up. He had cut his hair short again like he wore it in college. There was something cleaner in his look, not just physically but emotionally. He held doors open without apology, asked questions and listened with care. We went to a small diner just outside downtown, one with cracked leather booths and a waitress who called everyone "baby." I ordered pancakes. He ordered an omelet and asked for extra hot sauce because Mom made me soft. And accord, I laughed, and for a moment, it was like the world had folded back to simpler times before ambition clouded judgment, before the wrong voices whispered louder than mine. Over coffee, he said, "You know, I read your essay, twice." I looked up. "I didn't recognize myself in parts of it," he continued, and that scared me. "You weren't meant to recognize yourself," I said. "That version wasn't about you. It was about who I became because of silence, and who I had to become to break it." End quote. He nodded. "Well, you broke it, loud and clear." I sipped my coffee. "Good." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" "Of course," I said, "but not anymore, because then I wouldn't be who I am now. And honestly, Michael, I like her." He smiled. "I do too." After brunch, he dropped me off at the community center. I was teaching a writing workshop, something new, something Evelyn insisted I do after the essay took off. "These women need to know they can tell their stories," she'd said, "and you need to help them find their voice." So, every Sunday afternoon, I gathered with a small group, 5 to 10 women, each with a story tucked beneath layers of pain and pride. I helped them unlock the words. That afternoon, one woman, Esther, read a passage about escaping a toxic marriage after 30 years. "It wasn't the leaving that hurt," she said, voice trembling. "It was realizing I had taught my children to call silence love." Her words cracked something open in all of us. We cried. Not because we were broken, but because we weren't alone. After the session, Evelyn pulled me aside. "You're not just telling your story anymore," she said. "You're teaching others how to survive theirs." I nodded. That's the point. That night, I received another letter. This one from Jessica. Handwritten. It read, "Lorraine, I never expected you to win. I underestimated you. I won't apologize. That wouldn't mean much now. But I do want you to know Michael was never my puppet. He loved you, even when he didn't know how to show it. Whatever you do next, I hope it brings you peace. Jessica." I sat with the letter for a long time. Not angry, not satisfied, just still. Then I folded it, tucked it into the back of my notebook, and wrote, "I don't need her apology. I already forgave myself for needing one." Later, I sat by the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about how far I'd come from the moment on that doorstep when my son said, "My family doesn't need you to now," when I had found a new family made of truth-tellers and survivors. And I thought about the fire Jessica tried to burn me with, how it didn't consume me, it forged me. Spring arrived slowly, like a shy guest unsure if they were welcome after a long winter. Dogwoods bloomed along the sidewalks, and the air carried that sweet, unfamiliar promise of renewal. I felt it in my chest, a lightness I hadn't known in years. One Thursday morning, I received an invitation. Street Marks was hosting its annual Women of Grace luncheon I hadn't attended since before Jessica came into our lives. Back then, I'd chaired the event 3 years in a row, handpicked the menu, folded the napkins into swans. The note read simply, "Lorraine, we'd be honored to have you speak this year. Topic: Resilience and Rebirth. With gratitude, Pastor Harris and the Women's Ministry Team." I set the card down gently, feeling my breath catch not from fear, but from something else. Closure, acceptance, maybe even celebration. On the day of the luncheon, I wore a sunflower yellow dress with a high neckline and soft sleeves. It had belonged to my mother. She'd worn it the last time she led choir, her voice strong, her spine straighter than any insult the world had thrown at her. Sharon picked me up, fussing over my earrings like we were headed to prom. "Look at you," she said, standing tall in full bloom. At the church, the fellowship hall was full round tables, centerpieces of fresh daisies, the scent of lemon bars and roasted chicken floating in the air. Familiar faces, new ones too. Michael was there. He sat in the back, quiet but present, wearing a navy blazer and a humble expression. I didn't ask him to come. He came because he chose to. That meant more than any apology ever could. When it was time to speak, Pastor Harris introduced me with a reverence I hadn't felt since my nursing days. Today's speaker, he said, did not just survive the storm, she became the shelter others could run to. The room quieted as I stepped up to the podium. I didn't bring notes. I brought memory. "When I was a girl," I began, "my mother used to say, 'You teach people how to treat you.' I thought that meant being polite, being useful, making yourself small to keep the peace. But I've learned that sometimes teaching people how to treat you means standing up even when your knees shake." Heads nodded, eyes filled. I lost things I thought I couldn't live without, but in losing them, I found myself. I found a voice I didn't know I had. I found a community of women who weren't just survivors, they were warriors, truth-tellers, healers. I paused, letting the silence sink in. And if you are sitting here today wondering if you are enough, if you've done enough, let me tell you, your existence, your voice, your dignity are not up for negotiation. You are not here by accident. You are here because you've already survived what tried to erase you. Applause followed, long, standing, heartfelt. Afterward, women lined up to speak with me. They shared stories. Some wept. Some simply held my hand and said, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." When I finally made my way to the back of the room, Michael stood, his eyes glassy. "You were incredible," he said. "You were listening," I replied. "I always was," he admitted. "I just didn't know how to hear." We sat for a moment, side by side. "I'm starting a scholarship fund," he said, "for women returning to school after hardship. I want to name it after Grandma, my mother." I touched his hand. She would have been proud. "So am I," he said quietly. "Of you." That evening, back home, I placed the event program beside my notebook. I opened to a new page and wrote, "I once thought I needed my son's validation to feel whole. But healing didn't come through him. It came through truth, through sisterhood, through every woman who said, 'I see you, I believe you, I am you,' and I will never shrink again. The final chapter didn't arrive with a bang. It came gently, like a letter without return address, folded into the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. Months passed. The lawsuit was officially dismissed. Jessica never refiled. Her name faded from conversation, her power gone the moment she could no longer weaponize silence or status. Word around town was that she'd taken a job out of state, somewhere cold, somewhere distant. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. Michael continued to rebuild. He started volunteering at the community center, teaching financial literacy to single mothers. I watched him change not because I demanded it, but because life, when lived with truth, demands it of you. We talked often now, not about what was lost, but about what was left and what was possible. We laughed more, cooked together on Sundays. Sometimes he brought groceries, other times, questions. But he never brought shame again. One warm afternoon in May, I stood in front of a new building, the Lorraine Harper Resource House, a place for women transitioning out of domestic or emotional hardship. It was a modest brick home, converted into shelter, hope, and second chances. The community center board had approached me months prior. "We want your name on it," they said, "because you turned pain into purpose." I didn't hesitate. Inside, the walls were painted soft lavender. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon. There were books, beds, quiet corners, and loud laughter. The first resident moved in on a Tuesday. Her name was Dana. 2 kids, 1 job offer, a past heavy with bruises both seen and unseen. She hugged me when she arrived. "I read your essay," she whispered. "I didn't know women like you existed." I smiled. "Now you do." That night, I stood in the doorway after she went to bed. The house was still, peaceful. I thought back to the woman I was that day on Michael's porch, the one who reached for his hand and was met with rejection so sharp it nearly broke her. But she didn't break. She rose. She told the truth. She rebuilt. I walked home under a violet sky, the streetlights flickering on like small, steady stars. When I got in, I made a cup of chamomile tea, lit one last candle, and opened my notebook for the final time. I wrote, "They told me to disappear." I decided to expand. "They told me to be grateful for scraps." I set the table instead. "They told me I was too emotional, too loud, too much." I became a story no one could silence. My son said, "My family doesn't need you." But I learned that family isn't who keeps you around. It's who holds your name with honor when you're not in the room. Then, gently, I closed the notebook. Not because my story ended, but because it had begun again. This story reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. It often speaks in quiet defiance, steady resilience, and unwavering self-worth. Lorraine's journey shows that even in the face of betrayal, dismissal, and loss, a woman's dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. And when she chooses to reclaim it, she doesn't just heal herself. She becomes a beacon for others. True family is not defined by blood, but by those who honor your truth, even in your absence.